ACCA, Developing Professional Accountants.
Right, we're moving on to decision making now, and we're looking at marginal costing. Should be just a brief introductory topic, I hope. Let's remind ourselves of marginal costing. A lot of you should have come across this topic somewhere else, but who cares? It's so fundamental to so many things that we're going to look in the future. Let's make sure that we're absolutely happy as to what it's all about. So, what is marginal costing? Well, what we want to focus on here is how we deal with simple decision making. And that's what marginal costing is about. It provides information for decision making. I suppose the question is, why is that? When we look at marginal costing, we are considering the cost behaviour of cost elements when we classify our costs. In particular, we separate the costs into a fixed and a variable element. When we look at the fixed costs, because of their fixed nature, we do not bother linking those costs to the product. Instead, we say they are simply incurred over time, and we'll discuss why in a moment. Whereas variable costs vary proportionately with the level of activity, and hence there does make sense to link them to the units as they are produced. So that's the basic idea behind marginal costing. Now, if we were to look at fixed costs, we could define a fixed cost as a cost which does not change with activity. Or if you wish, a cost which remains constant in total terms. Maybe that is a better way of thinking about it. As such, if we were to plot our fixed cost, it would look something like this, plotting cost to level of activity. If you don't like the term level of activity, simply that's the output or sales in units, don't worry about that. All we would say is this: fixed cost is a constant in total terms. Now, that means that whenever you look for fixed costs in a decision-making question, you expect to see a total figure, yes, rather than a figure per unit. So, we've got our fixed cost element, and then we look at our variable costs. Well, hold on. Variable costs vary proportionately. Vary proportionately with activity. In simple terms, if the level of activity rises by 10%, variable costs go up by 10%. If the level of activity drops by 50%, then the variable costs drop by 50%. If the level of activity is zero, the costs are zero. So what we see here is a straight line rising through the origin. Now, the important thing associated with that proportionate rise is that if we look at the gradient, we see that the gradient is a constant at all points on that line. And of course, the gradient shows the cost per unit. So, if that's the case, what we can say about variable costs is this. If we want to look at it on a per unit cost, the variable cost per unit is a constant. So what we're saying here is that we expect to see the fixed costs to be given in total terms because that's the way they're incurred over time. Whereas variable costs are incurred in direct relation to the number of units being produced. So, looking at that cost behaviour, we've briefly discussed what variable and fixed are. Now let's look at a little simple example to illustrate how this all pans out. What I've got here is I've got some simple numbers just to try and understand how it is that we play around with these numbers and the sort of things that we may be looking to calculate. So, I've got a selling price of 20, a variable cost of 12, a fixed cost of 15,000, and the budgeted level of activity of 3,000 units. What I want to do is I want to calculate something called contribution per unit and budgeted, and also a budgeted profit. By so doing, hopefully I can illustrate to you the things that I really want to look at. So what did we say? We said that the selling price was 20 and the variable cost was 12. If we offset the variable cost from the selling price, we get something called contribution. Now, contribution is central to everything to do with marginal costing. It's central in figurative terms, we're going to see that in a moment, but also because of the manner in which it may be calculated. And that's what I want to illustrate now. You see, we've just calculated the contribution per unit. And I suppose what that's saying is that is the net amount that we generate for every unit that we make and sell. But hold on a moment. We're also able to multiply that by the number of units to get the total contribution, 24,000 in this case. And you could argue that that may have some relationship to a target or aim of how much contribution we need to generate. You see, fixed costs, we said were 15,000. They are going to be in total terms. So we get a profit of what? What did we say? 9,000, something like that. So what I've tried to do is to illustrate maybe how we could lay things out here. Can I point out that you never ever link the fixed cost on a per unit base because we've already stated that fixed costs are fixed. They are constant in total terms. We could, of course, don't have to, but we could have multiplied by 3,000 every time. But if you think about it, it's a bit of a waste of time, isn't it? Because we can get to the contribution figure that much more quickly the other way around. So what have I tried to show you here? Well, firstly, the importance of contribution. Secondly, what we have here is what I would describe as the marginal costing pro forma. Sales less variable cost is contribution, less fixed cost equals profit. So please, when we look at marginal costing analyses, we generate contribution per unit. That contribution target can then be used to cover the fixed costs and make a profit. When it comes to marginal costing, you must be able to use basic marginal costing ideas across a wide range of different parts of the syllabus.